Welcome to the Keystones Podcast. This is the first ever podcast here in Plettenberg Bay. Keystones is an expedition to travel from Cape Town, the whole of Southern Africa, but from Cape Town all the way through to Arusha in Tanzania. And as I travel, I'm looking to stop at various projects and interesting conservation initiatives, as well as social development initiatives, but also just to be curious, really, of the natural world and change makers that are making this place a better place. And today I'm sitting here with Ian Michler, who is one of my dad's old friends, Nick Chevalier. Sorry, I didn't actually introduce myself. I'm Sam Chevalier, hosting this podcast, and I'm sitting here with Ian. And thank you, Ian, for coming on the first podcast of Keystones Expedition.
Cheers, Sam. Let's drink to that. It's good to have you here. And what a great man your dad is. Eh? I've done so many wonderful projects with him over the years, including the Tracks of Giants, working with the land invasions in Zimbabwe, bloodlines. So we go back a long way. So it's wonderful to have you following in his footsteps. Big boots to fill.
Sheepers, they really are big boots to fill. But Ian, I remember when I was sitting at my dad's house when I was around 22 or 23 when Bloodlines was being produced. And I didn't think I wanted to be in film at that point, or in documentary film. But I remember just sitting there and watching you guys sitting in the kitchen by the big window there, discussing and debating bloodlines, and just thinking, Jesus, this is very interesting conversations. And so obviously not being involved at all, but listening through subconscious sort of thoughts. And it's just amazing to see sort of the impact that's had. Do you want to explain maybe just a little bit about bloodlines, just in case?
Well, I mean, so that's one of the projects that's taken up a lot of my time in the last 25 years now. I started on that project, which is basically exposing the horrors and the brutality and the conservation lies and deception that embraces most, not all, but most of the predator breeding industry and the can hunting industry. And I was living up in the Okavango Delta in Botswana, and moved up there in the early 1990s, and I've always been fascinated by the sustainability challenge, and I was particularly focused on the sustainability of our ecotourism models. And one of the lines that was being pushed up there was that if we trophy hunting was a cornerstone of our conservation, and to me it just didn't make sense that killing the gene pool was sustainable, and I could not fathom how this concept of killing lions and elephants was the best way we had of conserving them. And so that's how, one of the themes when I started my journalism career was on the trophy hunting industry. Anyway, to cut a long story, one day a pilot said to me, if you go south from here, there's another thread to this whole trophy hunting industry that you're completely unaware of. And anyway, after a few more months, maybe even a year or so of investigating trophy hunting in the Okavango, I took his word and I did go south, and I ended up in the Orange Free State. And I then got to understand what he was talking about, and really what was happening is one or two operators, if they couldn't get the lions on a so-called fair chase hunt in the Okavango, they would send them into the Free State, and they were shooting canned hunts, lions had been bred on these farms. So that was the beginning of my research into the concept of breeding predators in cages to be shot in confined areas, which is what we know as can hunting. Some people call it high fence hunting. But I did that, Sam, for 15 years. Journalism, writing stories, taking stills, images, reporting on it, and I got very little traction. And it was not until we started Bloodlines and put that whole feature documentary together with your dad, Nick, and Pippa Hankinson, whose idea it was. Pippa was the one who came to me and said, let's do this. But what was interesting is, and Nick will tell you this, is that for years before we started Bloodlines, I'd been saying to Nick, come with me, just bring a camera. You won't believe this footage that we can get, and just keep it for archival stuff, And Nick was always, he was always on another project. We had something else coming up, and then when he had time, I wasn't available. But Bloodlines, in essence, brought home in a very visual, horrific manner as to the brutality of the predator breeding and the can hunting industry. I think for me, what was fascinating about Bloodlines was, from a filmmaker's perspective, is that, and I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a storyteller, and I have experience right across Africa on the ground at the coalface, as it were, with the merging of ecotourism and communities and conservationists and scientists and ecologists, and is it working, is it not working? Nick, your dad, is the filmmaker, so, and then of course Pippa as the producer. We made this great team. But once Bloodlines was released, the success in terms of bringing greater awareness and people's responses to this issue was exponential. So I'd been slaving away for 15 plus years more. I mean, when was Bloodlines released? 2015, so close to 20 years with little success. And for me, what it taught was the power of the visual impact that film can have. And yes, stills, they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that's absolutely true. But if you combine words with this powerful, moving visual narrative, which film is, you can get an incredible conservation message across in a very, very powerful and effective way. And that's what the film did. It was able to portray the horrors that I couldn't express in writing or through a stilled image. And I think that's the fundamental reason why we had such great success with the film.
Well, that's thank you for explaining that. Nick was my father there, my dad. He's been obviously a visual storyteller most of his life, in documentary and 50-50, carte blanche sort of. People that are South African listening to that's very kind of investigative sort of journalism, very specific to wildlife. I think my dad's played, and I mean that's why I got into co-founding Rewild Africa, because it's a storytelling company and stories have the power to really create impact. And as you've said, I've seen that happen, and that's one of the big reasons why I'm motivated to do this trip across Southern Africa, because if I can create even a little bit of moving footage or even a drone shot or something that creates some sort of narrative that puts it in someone's face, maybe we can get a little bit quicker, a little bit more traction on
environmental issues.
Yeah.
Sam, I can only be 110% supportive of you on undertaking this journey and trying to meet as many people as you can to hear their stories, and that's the exciting part for you, is how you're going to weave them all together. Do you tell them as little individual vignettes, or do you weave them into a bigger story or whatever? But I mean, I think of other things that I've done with your dad and the role that he's played as well in the filmmaking process. So the Tracks of Giants project, he joined us when we walked across the Namib Desert. I mean, that was an exciting thing to do, crossing one of the oldest and driest, hottest deserts on the planet. He was with us when we did the walk all the way from Maputo down to Isimangaliso, and we were met by Dr. Ian Michler at the end. That was a a 10-day walk along the coast from Maputo to Isimangaliso. Incredible walk that. And he was with us at another section as well, I think on the Zambezi somewhere. And his footage brought the whole that tracks project to life in a way that we certainly couldn't have done or told, if we'd just done it with print and with media.
Yeah, no, it has a very strong role to play, and he's had a big influence. And I think just moving the sort of conversation from storytelling to visual storytelling towards the story that I'm here for, which I've come through to Plettenberg Bay, which is where we are now, and I've been following a little bit of the story of the Robberg Coastal Corridor, looking at the Greater Eden to Addo project, but also now looking at the Robberg Corridor. And the Robberg Corridor exists by the peninsula, if anyone's been to Plettenberg Bay. But if you could just paint a quick picture for us on, the context of, they were looking at a map, where is Robberg Coastal Corridor, and where does it fit into the larger Eden to Addo project?
Well, I think so. The whole Eden to Addo corridor initiative was founded by Joan Burning, and there were a number of other environmentalists, concerned conservationists living in this area who assisted her in the early days. But she's the one that stayed the course and followed it through. And the initial concept was linking Eden, the Garden Route National Park, and those wonderful forests on the coast, going inland through to the Baviaanskloof, an incredible tract of mountainous wilderness, and then from the Baviaanskloof across the Springbok Vlakte to Addo Elephant National Park. And so already, if you just take those three big protected areas, you've got at least 5 different biomes in there, and you've got some incredible natural beauty, covering amazing plant life, bird life, and then of course the charismatic species, elephant, lion, buffalo, all found in Addo. But no more than 18 kilometers coming east of Garden Route is this incredible peninsula called Robberg. And for anyone who's visited this region, I mean, it is the standout geographical feature. And so very soon the concept of linking Robberg through a ribbon, corridor of ribbon along the coast to Garden Route started becoming a reality. And through the vision of a number of different people, it is now de facto in place, and they've managed to get the buy-in of all the landowners along the coast. And so we have now the whole marine world linked to the Eden to Addo initiative. So Plet is very well known for its whale watching, great white sharks. It's got a nice growing colony of Cape fur seals here, not to mention all the different dolphin species. So that whole marine world, anchored by Robberg, which is this, as I say, this incredible feature, this peninsula that juts out into the ocean, is now linked by an 18-kilometer marine corridor to Garden Route National Park, and then goes all the way up to Addo. So it's an incredibly exciting project, and a vital one, I think, because there's all this biodiversity to protect in these regions, and I think it offers also incredible ecotourism potential. So we know that ecotourism has become a pillar of our conservation initiatives, and there are a lot of communities along this corridor, all the way from here in Plet, right the way through up to Addo. And if those communities buy in to the concept of the ecological corridor, and then of course the ecotourism opportunities that come from that, then I think it's got longevity. It'll be an incredibly sustainable way of protecting quite significant tracts of habitat and the immense biodiversity, the rich biodiversity that exists in the whole region.
Thank you for explaining that, Ian. What gets me excited is, with context to the word keystone and why I've started Keystones, which is what is a keystone species, which is obviously exploring sort of the role a specific species has in an ecosystem, like a lion or a leopard or an elephant specifically to this context here, and how having these apex predators or large mammals, or it's not just keystones, obviously not just these big animals. They've seen keystones being other smaller animals too. The big part of this journey of trying to figure these out is we can't just be protecting a species, but we need to be protecting the habitat.
Yeah.
And I think the big dialogue over the years has been trying to save the rhino or save the elephants, etc. And we can't ignore population of humans across southern Africa. We can't ignore that, and it's gonna happen more over the next couple of years, especially with African development. So we have to listen to the developments of this, but understand that we need habitat. And why do we need habitat? Is obviously because of regulating our climate, which is that link between biodiversity and climate change. So I think that the idea of Eden to Addo and developing wildlife corridors is critical for the survival of humanity. And obviously one question that gets placed is, how does that benefit communities? And ecotourism, I think, is the strongest one at this point. Is there anything else that we can start asking from a finance perspective? Because I think at the end of the day, it does come down to finance. Specifically with that's one of my biggest questions, like how we engage with communities across Southern Africa.
Well, so people often ask me why or how does finance get to play such a big role? And if you take a step back, I like to distinguish between preservation and conservation. And if we can understand the differences between those two, then we get to understand why finance does, money, financial value plays a role. So, preservationism is really based on habitat, wilderness, wild places being left alone without any human interference. Really, that for me, that's really what it boils down to. But I don't think we have that privilege any longer, because of what you've also mentioned already is the human pressure, so the population pressure on wild space, and also the competing economic forces. And so with our growth models and our growth paradigms today, which by the way is a whole different discussion, but they demand that we continue on this path of unlimited growth in a world and a planet that is scientifically very clear that it can only offer finite resources. However, the economic and political systems demand that they offer up unlimited, because we're always trying to increase. We always want more growth. We want more dividend payouts. We want the shares that we invest in, the price must continue to go up. And so, so we've got that whole paradigm playing itself out. And so we've got mining and agriculture and housing developments, which are all competing for these wilderness areas. Because there's going to be a consultant, there's going to be a scientist or an ecologist who will put together an EIA that will say, well, we can mine this protected area or this wilderness space in a diligent way. We won't harm it. We'll rehabilitate. We'll take out all the waste and so on. And so ecotourism is a competing force to those other economic activities. And so for me, that's why we end up in this role of conservation, because we're actually managing these protected areas now. As I said, preservation, we left them alone. We can't do that any longer. We've got all these competing forces, so we have to conserve, which implies that we're involved in a management process. If we're involved in a management process, then and ecotourism has become an important part of that, then there's money involved, there's a finance involved. We pay to go to see the national park. You as a filmmaker have to pay to get a license to film in these protected areas. You sell your documentaries to Nat Geo or BBC. They sell them on. So whether we like it or not, there's money involved. And so ecotourism has become a vital component to our conservation, in that it sees off these other competing activities, mining, forestry, agriculture, and so on. And that's why it's got to be seen as a vital component to protecting this whole region. So Plet already has a thriving ecotourism industry. The Baviaanskloof has a thriving ecotourism industry, and Addo, we know, is one of South Africa's most popular protected areas. The important part now is linking the communities and people who live on the corridor routes that are going to link those existing protected areas. And so, the educational awareness and awareness programs are going to be vital for people to understand why they're important, and developing whatever ecotourism we can along these routes will be vital. So Addo is already partnering with a company called Stay Unique. They're developing little cabins, small, so it's light footprint, very ecologically sound developments on farms, and each farmer along the route who is involved in the corridor. For example, if he buys into the concept, he gets one of these onto his property. They employ a certain number of people to take care of these units as guides along the way. We can develop low-impact hiking trails. We can develop low-impact mountain biking along this coastal region. Hikes along the coastal region, kayaking. So there's a whole range of low-impact ecotourism activities that can take place. So I see it as a vital component to not only into Addo's future, but also this whole concept of ecological corridors. The success of them will be based on ecotourism as well.
You said something earlier, about the last roll of the dice. What was that about?
So I use that term quite a lot. The last roll of the dice. It's like, you can imagine the gambler in the Last Chance Saloon, and he's got one more throw to get a double six. And really, for me, we don't have the luxury any longer, Sam, of being able to create new national parks like Kruger and Serengeti and Etosha. We don't have the space left. We've had 300 years of human development, which has been based around our economic, social, and human benefits. We've had no ecological consideration going into that development. So we've put mines and huge housing developments, highways, dams, agricultural projects, golfing estates, without any ecological consideration. And the result has been that we have our protected area network that is now fragmented. So if you can you show me anywhere on this continent where we can fit in another Kruger or another Serengeti? So the only chance we have of increasing habitat is through this concept of ecological corridors, or in terms of frontier, transboundary cases, what we call transfrontier conservation. And so, it's the last throw of the dice we have of increasing habitat and of course, then increasing our ability to protect biodiversity, the genetic integrity of that biodiversity is through these conservation option programs. And that's why I've referred to it as the last throw of the dice. Because if we can't get ecological corridors and transfrontier conservation right, then we are going to be left with increased pressure on these already isolated patches. And we know that the more isolated a patch, the smaller a patch of habitat, the higher the costs of managing it. And so the conservation challenges become significantly greater, significantly more onerous. I think what's interesting is that in Africa we have some incredible opportunities to put ecological corridors and transfrontier conservation to the test in a big landscape way. So if you look at northern Tanzania, you've got, in fact, southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, you've got Masai Mara, you've got Amboseli, you've got the Chulu Hills, you've got Tsavo, north and south, not far from each other, all in the southern regions of Kenya. In northern Tanzania, you've got the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, you've got Arusha National Park and Mount Meru, you've got Tarangire, you've got Lake Manyara, you've got the Ngorongoro Conservation Area, you've got the Serengeti, you've got Loliondo, you've got the Grumeti. These are significant areas. Currently, some of them are isolated from each other, and secondly is that they're run by different management authorities, which is also part of our fragmentation. They should actually all be run by one management authority. But if we can somehow put aside this rapacious development appetite that we have and look at the opportunities for linking all of these areas that I've spoken about with ecological corridors. And they don't have to be significant tracks. Some of them can just be migratory routes. But then suddenly, rather than looking at all these fragmented areas, we could be looking at a significant area covering, well over 50, 60,000 square kilometers. That's going to be far easier to manage as one ecological unit than, 45 different fragmented little patches. The same in Southern Africa. You look at the big Peace Parks initiative in Kaza, which is the Kavango Zambezi initiative. There's over 35, 40 different protected areas which are within reasonably close proximity to each other. Currently, they're managed in 5 or 6 different countries under a whole range of different authorities. So that is fragmentation. Besides the geographical fragmentation, we have management fragmentation. But in essence, if we can just think with an ecological mind and link them, and that's what Peace Parks is trying to do, we're looking at an area of over 300,000 square kilometers. And that includes the northern regions of Botswana, so Chobe, Savuti, the Okavango, linking that to parks in western Zambia, for example, Liwa Plain, southeastern Angola. We're looking at Hwangi in Zimbabwe. We're looking at that whole Victoria Falls region, crossing into Zambia as well. So suddenly we have a significant ecological area which could be managed under one authority. And then there's all this incredible opportunity for genetic interchange to take place, climate mitigation, and so on. And so I think Africa's got some incredible opportunities to make ecological corridors and transfrontier conservation projects work really, really well.
Sure. No, it's very exciting. I think, like as you were saying, some of those parks, Sava and Meru and all these places, and like when I head up those ways, I'm going to be engaging with a lot of sort of those questions So I definitely feel naive at this point in terms of what does it actually mean, to produce.
Well, Sam, you know what? You've hit on it. It's naive. I mean, if you're already in yes, you don't have the experience that your dad has, but you've been at this 10, 15 years. You've got a master's degree in sustainability. You've had a lot of experience guiding out there. You've been to so many of these protected areas. So, but the point I'm making is that, can you imagine all the people that are living around these protected areas? Can you imagine all the businesses that are operating within this kind of greater network? What they don't know. And so the point I'm making here is that education and awareness is going to be vital to the success of ecological corridors and transfrontier conservation. And if I have a criticism, it's we're not doing enough. And that's why for me, your journey, what you're going to try to do, you're going to play a very important role in bringing greater awareness to these issues, what I've just raised now in terms of all of those protected areas. I mean, all those communities have got to be made aware of why it's so important to be cognizant and to respect these ecological corridors. And a concept that we're going to hear more and more about is the 30 by 30. Now, I don't know, for your listeners, the 30 by 30 is the 30% of a particular country's land to be set aside as protected area of some sort by the year 2030. And this is an initiative that's come out of, IUCN and all the major conservation agencies around the world. And I think it's admirable, absolutely admirable, particularly in a country like ours here in South Africa, which has only got about 6.5% to 7% of our land set aside as protected. But if we're going to have any chance of achieving the 30 by 30 goals, ecological corridors are going to play a vital role in this. And so if we accept that we just don't have the space or the time really to start creating new Kruger parks or new Khalakhalis, then what we can do though is use ecological corridors to link our existing protected areas and then facilitating the private sector to open up huge tracts of land that is currently under agriculture or has been set aside as a private conservancy or a private biosphere. But they still stand in isolation. They're still fragmented. And so these ecological corridors will be able to link those private lands, take down the fences, link them to Addo, link them to Baviaansklip, link them to Kruger, link them to Kgalagadi. That's the only way we have a realistic chance of achieving the 30 by 30 objectives.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big objective. It's a big objective, and, it's so important to communicate to various stakeholders. I use the word stakeholders as government officials, to private landowners, to communities. Like, the messaging has to be really well done, because if you're speaking to your finance people, you have to have a carbon project or a biodiversity project that has an investment opportunity, right? So or like you're talking to a community, you have to engage with, firstly, that is a complex system in itself, working in those, like, how does the community work, tribe community, or however you want to explain, like, where does the money flow?
Yes.
How does if it's ecotourism, how do you realize that, because also a big thing is ecosystem services. So obviously that's another word that just, I find frustrating, because it seems so mechanical. But an ecosystem service is what nature provides us.
It's vital.
Clean air, clean water, etc. So any human being, listening to this depends on clean air and clean water.
Yeah.
And therefore, ecosystem services is vital for their life, for their living.
But just stop there, Sam. So that point you're making is actually should be at the very top of our understanding and our awareness programs. Because if you want people to buy into something, then you have to attach them to what you're trying to educate them about or make them aware. And then we need to know, people, communities, families need to understand that their very own survival depends on what you've just pointed out. We each need clean air, we need topsoil to grow our food, we need carbon sequestration systems, we need fresh water to drink. It's vital. So forget about whether you're wealthy or poor, whether you're aware or not aware, whether you're able to or unable to. It doesn't matter. Class, religion, economic standing, and political standing. Every single human being, as an individual and as a family and as a community, needs those things. That's where we should start. Because I think today, people don't understand that. People do not understand how important, or how, not only how important, that their survival depends on the health and vitality of our ecosystems. You know?
Yeah.
And if we start there, then I think it's going to be much easier to hang everything else around, the concept of habitat and biodiversity. The other thing that people need to understand that, okay, so you need all of that, but what makes then a healthy or fully functioning ecosystem? And of course, it's not only the ecological or biological systems that take place, but it's the plants and the animals that exist within that ecosystem. That's why it's important not to cut those trees down, or to kill those animals, or to harvest these grasses at an unsustainable level, because no particular species can survive in isolation. Lions cannot survive in isolation. Particular tree species cannot survive in isolation. They need fully functioning ecosystems to survive. And so that's your core reason why biodiversity protection is so vital. And habitats are not functioning if they don't have that biodiversity. And if that's not in place, we don't survive. And so we build out the educational and awareness program. And if people can buy into that, then we've got a great chance, I believe.
No, we do. I think it's a big task we have in being able to communicate those various levels to those various levels. And what's interesting is going to be to see how sort of the finance world literally tries to build a monetary value around payment for ecosystem services, which I'm not going to digress into now, because
so that's a whole other. But let's make a commitment to each other. We take that up at a later stage.
Yeah.
Because then you go into this whole concept of intrinsic value versus instrumental value thinking, and I think it's very important to have that discussion, actually, because can you value fresh water in terms of putting financial value on it only, or do we need to understand the basis of intrinsic value thinking before we get to truly understand what it's worth? Is it,
No, it's one of the most difficult conversations.
Yeah.
I think that.
So let's have it.
No, I'm keen.
Let's have it down the line.
No, let's have it down the line. I think I'm very curious in understanding solutions to ecological restoration, and if the capital financial world is able to be a solution. We live in the capitalist system now, so we have to find solutions within it.
Absolutely.
So,
and one of the threats or problems we face with successful corridors is that they are underfunded. So we need the money. You see, here comes the money again. But we need money to carry out the educational awareness programs. We need money to create them, to delineate them, we need money to develop ecotourism. Ecotourism is based around an income and a return to the operator, to the environment, to the community. So So underfunding or lack of funding is one of the constraints we face in developing successful ecological corridor network.
Well, that's one that, like, at least let's try and plan for maybe when I head back down this way to have a 2.0, at least on that discussion, because I mean I've worked in the payment for ecosystem services sector, and I am, I'm curious enough to figure it out. I mean, if people can just see that biodiversity loss is an issue, then I've done my job.
Yeah,
right? So
I agree.
So if I can just do that and say that climate change is an issue, putting carbon in the soil is cool, offsetting is useful. I wouldn't say it's the solution. Hey, is your company offsetting? It's great. Like, is your company offsetting? But it's the carbon tunnel. You're just looking at you're looking at carbon in the soil, which we've already put carbon in the atmosphere, and that's already putting us on a trajectory where it's going to go. But the only way we're going to regulate the climate is through biodiversity, through microclimates, etc. Blah blah blah, and how we build those projects, where it's effective fire management or effective agroforestry projects or new plantations, etc. So I'm curious to go into those sort of.
But I mean, you accept. I mean, I know you do. So I'm just reinforcing this, that I mean the concept of why corridors are so vital. Because I mean, where are we going to get new Kruger National Parks, new Kgalaggadis, new Serengetis, new Etoshas? There's just, the space is no longer available.
So then what would you say to a private landowner, or just anyone who owns land?
Well, I think, I mean, so that's a very good question, Sam, because if we don't have the land available to create new Kruger Parks or new Kgalaggadis, we are going to have to rely on the private sector, the private landowners. And there are some incredible examples already existing in South Africa, so Twalo in Northern Cape, Pinder in KZN, here down the road we've got Shamwari. So what I'm thinking is that all of those lands, those protected areas, are going to have to become part of our 30 by 30 objectives. And what we're going to have to do is to link them to the larger protected area network. And so I would say to anyone who has an existing protected area and it's a fully functioning ecosystem, and I think that's an important point. We need to distinguish between fully functioning systems and private landowners who've merely put a fence up around their farm and they're breeding a high value species to make a lot of money off. The trade in rhino horn, for example, or lion bones, or a particular species like sable for hunting. That's got very little to do with conservation, in my mind, and those cannot be regarded as fully functioning systems. So I'm talking about the private land that is operating as a functional ecosystem, and could become part of, and would certainly benefit from being linked to another system or a much bigger protected area. So I think those landowners, my appeal to them is really to start looking at neighbors or your closest protected area. Who else, for example, in your vicinity or your region is doing similar work to you, and start looking at developing the ecological corridors to link your property with other properties. Take your fences down. The whole debate around whether we should be resorting to corridor conservation is also worth another podcast. I'm not corridor conservation, sorry. Siege conservation, where we have go back to fencing. But Yeah, I think the private landowners have got a very important role to play. And I think there's some incredible examples that have been created in the last 30, 40, 50 years. And I think if we can link those to existing protected areas or other examples of private initiatives within the greater region, then that's our best chance of doing or getting to our 30-30 objectives.
Last question, specific to an audience, is what would you say to, some guy who's driving in his car on his way to work, or to someone who's not directly involved in conservation but wants to do something? Like, how would you encourage them, or how would you ask sort of that person to engage with these subjects?
Well, Sam, I think it's one of the biggest challenges we all face. When we say we all, those of us involved in ecology, science, the environmental sciences, conservation, is how do we engage the wider population? How do we get them to understand what's at stake, and then buy into trying to develop a truly sustainable future? Because a truly sustainable future has to be based on ecological sustainability. It's logical. You can't have economic sustainability without ecological sustainability. It's not possible. And so my appeal is for people to actually take the time to become more aware of what's at stake. When you hear stories or read stories or see stories about the environment, and they might be negative stories, read them, get to understand what they're trying to tell you. Because if we do not make ourselves aware, if we do not heed the warnings, then we're going to face a very, very unstable future. And I'm not talking about the next 10, 15 years, but further down the line. And, there's a school of, you will know this, Sam, from in sustainability study, or collapse theory. There's what they call the deep adaptation theories. And, there's a growing group of scientists who believe that actually the 1.5 to 2 degree thresholds around climate change have been breached already. And so rather than looking at sustainable options, we should actually be looking at how do we adapt to living in very, very unstable environments. And I'm not that pessimistic, but if we don't become aware, if we don't get to understand what's at stake and the role that we play as individuals and families, then we have very little chance. So my appeal to everyone out there is, please take the environmental crisis, the ecological crisis seriously. And my appeal is to please start reading and start understanding what's at stake and the role that we as individuals and families play. Because only then can we say, right, this is what I can do to play a role in the solution going forward.
Oh, thanks so much. No, that's really, really, really helpful. And, I think we've kind of touched on all sorts of subjects this evening. Eden to Addo, Robert Corridor, all of which you can go deeper into if you're interested.
Right across Africa,
Yeah, so if you want to...
30-30, which is the talking point.
So I think this is just a space for you to become aware,
at
least the listener, to become aware of what they can dig into deeper. This is a resource. And, unless you have anything that you would like to say.
No, there's nothing else.
Do you have a favorite quote or a favorite...
Yes, I do. There are many people who write really, really well on these issues. My favorite author is George Monbiot. I think he is an incredible example of a scientist who is able to put these very profound, very complex issues into layman's terms. But as a quote, I love this one from David Suzuki. David Suzuki, for those of you who don't know him, he's a Canadian and he's an environmentalist, he's an author, he's a journalist, he's written many, many books, and he's a deep thinker about the world, the state we're in this planet, and what our path out is likely to be or could be. And this is what David Suzuki says. He says, the way we see the world shapes the way we treat it. If a mountain is a deity, not a pile of ore. If a forest is a sacred grove, not timber. If other species are biological kin, not resources. Or if the planet is our mother, not an opportunity, then we will treat each other with greater respect. Thus is the challenge, to look at the world from a different perspective. And so, Sam, in many ways, that little quote from David Suzuki can lead us into this concept of viewing the world through an intrinsic lens or through an instrumental value lens. Because what he's saying, his appeal is, let's not just view the world in terms of what it means and how it benefits humans. We actually need to understand that there's intrinsic value to this planet. That wilderness exists in and of itself, not because it may have a benefit to humans. That other species exist in and of themselves. They have intrinsic value, not just value to humans. And I think that is worthy of another podcast.
Sure. Thank you so much. I mean, yeah, no, that's a big one. I actually made a short film called Learning to Value, which looked at the sort of subjects, like what does it mean to value. But yeah, no, I thank you so much for this very interesting conversation. Is there anywhere that people can find your work if they want to go?
Well, I mean, I think, Bloodlines is a good source. Conservation Action Trust. So I'm a director of a group called Conservation Action Trust, which is a group of concerned journalists, environmentalists, ecotourism operators, scientists who see the world through a more tend towards a more intrinsic value understanding than an instrumental value understanding. My book, Living in Two Worlds, with my co-author, Dr. Ian Michler, who is an incredible human being in terms of not only his knowledge and experiences as a Jungian analyst, as a psychiatrist, as a medical doctor, as a guide in the wilderness, but also his work as a poet and as a writer. And so the book combines our two sort of ways we look at the world. I'm more scientifically based, I'm more practically based. Ian is more of the poet, and so we put the two together. So Living in Two Worlds can give your listeners good insight into a lot of the work that both Ian and I do. So yeah, and then my safari operation in Invent Africa, we run trips to 16 countries across Africa. So, and we try and do that in a way which is supportive of ecologically aware operators. One of our paradigms in running my safari operation is we do not seek to be large. I preach a soft footprint. I believe very strongly that ecotourism needs to have limits. And so if I'm going to preach that, then my company must have limits. And so we're not a large operation, but we seek not to be a large operation. We seek to remain a fairly small operation with a low footprint, and we support ground operators that are aware of their footprint. So yeah, I mean, that's, if you want to follow more of the work I do, I think those are your best bets. And then of course Eden to Addo.
Yes.
I'm a director of Eden to Addo, and I'm very proud of it, because what Joan and now Ree are achieving is phenomenal. So Eden to Addo is an incredible organization. Yeah, I've published a children's book called A Tale of Three Lions, and that I put out during the COVID period, published in the US, and that's aimed at kids between the ages of 4 and 7. And it has an environmental or conservation message around lions and why breeding lions in captivity and hunting lions is not a good idea for conservation. So that's another book that's out there.
Yeah, Tubers, that's a lot of work. I look forward to reading that book. No, seriously, thank you so much, Ian, and thank you to all the listeners who got this far. Really appreciate it. This is the first one. As I mission off tomorrow, I have to go get a vehicle registration connected to my car. So if you're ever traveling to Zambia or Zimbabwe, make sure you've got a police vehicle clearance to be able to travel through those countries. So that's what I'm doing tomorrow. But yeah, I'm really excited about my next adventure and my next character that I meet along the way, and whatever I see. It's going to be an interesting adventure. But yeah, thank you for this first little episode.
Sam, let's drink to not only the success of your journey, but also your safety and your good health along the way. And I'm sure it's going to be great.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ian.
Travel well.
Thank you so much. Cheers for now, everyone. Enjoy your day, evening, morning, swim, whatever you're doing.